Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that we don't often talk about when we discuss medieval history. Tonight we explore something that gets hidden in most history textbooks. Tonight we venture into a world that was both acknowledged and denied, both necessary and condemned, both powerful in some ways and deeply vulnerable in others. Tonight we tell the story of a day in the life of a medieval prostitute. Not the romanticized version that we see in movies, not the version from historical fiction that tends to dramatize and sensationalize, not the version that's been filtered through modern attitudes and modern morality, but the actual, historical reality of what daily life looked like for women who engaged in sex work in the medieval period. The history of prostitution is a hidden history. It's a history that gets excluded from polite conversation. It's a history that gets treated as either a sensational topic for entertainment or something that's completely ignored and avoided. We see movies and television shows that either dramatize the subject heavily or avoid it entirely. We read history books that might mention prostitution in passing, but don't really explore what it actually involved. We study medieval history and learn about kings and queens and religious figures and nobles and merchants, but we learn very little about the women who engaged in sex work. But prostitution was a real part of medieval society. Prostitution was recognized by law. Prostitution was regulated by city governments. Prostitution was acknowledged by the church, at least in some theological discussions. Prostitution involved real women living real lives in real circumstances, dealing with real challenges and real dangers. Tonight, we're going to explore that reality. We're going to look at what a day in the life actually looked like. We're going to understand the economics of medieval sex work, where the money came from, where the money went, and what it meant for the women involved. We're going to understand the social reality of what it was like to be a woman engaged in sex work in a medieval city. We're going to understand the circumstances that led women to this work, because it wasn't a random choice or a simple matter of moral failing. Please like and subscribe to our channel for more videos. We're going to understand the daily activities and the routines. We're going to understand what the women actually did, moment by moment, hour by hour, as they went through their days. We're going to understand the physical experience of the work. We're going to understand the emotional experience. We're going to understand the economic calculations and the survival strategies. And we're going to understand the dangers and the challenges and the risks that were always present. And through understanding the daily life of a medieval prostitute, we're going to understand something important about medieval society. We're going to understand something about medieval women. We're going to understand something about how medieval society was organized and how it functioned. We're going to understand something about the options available to women who didn't fit into the normal categories of respectable wives and daughters and nuns. But before we begin this historical exploration, before we immerse ourselves in the medieval world of sex work, before we follow women through their days in brothels and on streets and in the lives that medieval prostitutes actually live, let's make sure that you're completely comfortable. Let's make sure that your body is as relaxed as it can be. Find yourself a place where your body can rest completely and without any tension whatsoever. This should be a place where you feel supported. This should be a place where you feel safe. If you're sitting, let yourself sink deeper into the chair or the bed or whatever surface is beneath you. If you're lying down, let your entire body relax into the softness beneath you. Feel your body becoming heavier. Feel your body becoming more settled. Pay attention to your shoulders. If your shoulders are tense, let them drop away from your ears. Feel them relax. Feel them settle. Pay attention to your neck. Feel your neck relaxing. Feel any tension in your neck dissolving. Pay attention to your face. Feel your face becoming softer. Feel the muscles in your face releasing tension. Pay attention to your jaw. If your jaw is clenched, let it relax. Feel your mouth becoming softer. Feel your entire face becoming more relaxed and more peaceful. Pay attention to your arms. Feel them resting where they naturally want to rest. Feel them becoming heavier. Feel them becoming more relaxed. Pay attention to your hands. Feel your hands becoming looser. Feel any tension in your hands dissolving. Pay attention to your legs. Feel your legs becoming heavier. Feel them sinking deeper into the support beneath them. Pay attention to your feet. Feel your feet relaxing. Feel any tension in your feet dissolving. The space around you should feel safe and protected. This is a space where you can explore difficult historical topics without judgment. This is a space where you can learn about the lives of women who have historically been hidden or marginalized in our historical narratives and in our understanding of the past. This is a space where you can expand your understanding of history without shame or discomfort. If you have blankets nearby, pull them close to you. Wrap yourself in layers of softness and warmth and protection. Create a sense of being wrapped and contained and safe. If you don't have blankets, that's okay. Just focus on creating a sense of comfort and safety in your body and in the space around you. Now, take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. Feel the air moving through your body. Feel it moving down through your windpipe into your lungs. Feel your chest expanding as the air fills the upper parts of your lungs. Feel your belly expanding as the air fills the deepest parts of your lungs. Feel yourself filling completely with air. Hold that air for a moment. Let your body absorb the oxygen. Let yourself feel alive and present. Now exhale slowly through your mouth. Feel the air leaving your body in a slow, steady stream. Feel your chest and belly falling as the air leaves. Feel a sense of release and letting go. Feel your body becoming more relaxed. Feel yourself settling deeper. Let's do this again. Breathe in slowly. Feel the air. Feel the expansion. Feel yourself filling. Hold. Now breathe out slowly. Feel the release. Feel the settling. This breathing is your anchor. This breathing is what will help you move deeper into the story and deeper towards sleep. Whenever you feel like you need to refocus or whenever you feel like you're starting to wake up, you can return to this breathing pattern. Dim the lights if you haven't already. The screen that you're looking at should be barely visible. You should be able to make out the words, but only barely. The light should be minimal and non-demanding. It should be bright enough to guide you, but soft enough that it allows you to remain in a state of drowsiness and calm. Now, imagine yourself in the medieval period. Imagine a real medieval city. It could be London in England. It could be Paris in France. It could be Venice in Italy. It could be any number of real medieval cities that actually existed and that actually had brothels and sex workers. These medieval cities were crowded places. These cities were growing. These cities had populations that ranged from a few thousand to tens of thousands of people. These cities had commerce. These cities had trade. These cities had diverse populations with people from many different backgrounds. In these medieval cities, there was sex work. This was not a hidden or shameful secret that nobody talked about. This was recognized and regulated by authorities. This was acknowledged by the law. This was taxed. This was, in many cities, confined to specific districts so that it wouldn't spread through the respectable parts of town. In some cities, sex workers were required to wear distinctive clothing so that they could be easily identified. In some cities, they wore badges or insignia. In some cities, they wore certain colors. In some cities, they wore their hair in particular ways. The regulations varied from city to city, but the recognition was universal. This was not a hidden underground economy. This was not a criminal enterprise in the modern sense. This was a regulated part of the medieval city. Authorities acknowledged it. Authorities managed it. Authorities profited from it. But the lives of women engaged in sex work were lives of complexity. These women were not simply victims. These women were not simply exploited. These women had agency within limits. These women made choices within constraints. These women adapted to circumstances. These women survived. Tonight, we're going to follow several women through a complete day in the life of a medieval prostitute. We're going to see their routines. We're going to understand their economics. We're going to understand their relationships with each other, with their customers, with the authorities who regulated them, with a broader community that both condemned them and needed them. To truly understand the daily life of a medieval prostitute, you need to understand the historical context in which this work took place. You need to understand the conditions that created this work. You need to understand why women did this work and why medieval society tolerated or even regulated this work. The medieval world was a world with very different circumstances than the modern world. The medieval world was a world without modern medicine. The medieval world was a world without modern industry. The medieval world was a world without modern agriculture. The medieval world was a world where most people were poor and lived difficult lives. For women in particular, the medieval world offered very limited options. If you were born a woman in the medieval period, your options were fundamentally constrained by your gender. Let's explore what those options were. The first option was marriage. In the medieval world, marriage was a normal destiny for most women. If you were a woman, you were expected to marry. Marriage would provide you with a legal status and a place in society. Marriage would provide you with economic support from a husband. But marriage required a dowry if your family had any resources at all, and if your family was poor, finding a marriage might be very difficult. Also, marriage in the medieval world was not something that you chose freely. Your family arranged your marriage. Your family decided who you would marry. Your family made a decision based on economic and social considerations. Your own preferences were less important than the family's interests. You didn't get to choose your husband. You didn't get to choose when to marry. You didn't get to choose whether to marry. The second option was becoming a nun. If you wanted to, or if your family wanted you to, you could become a nun. This would remove you from secular society. This would give you a role in the church. This would provide you with some degree of education, if the convent provided education. But becoming a nun required money for a convent dowry, and many poor families couldn't afford this. The third option was working as a servant. If you were a woman without family resources, you could work as a servant. You could work for a wealthy family. You could work in the household of a noble or merchant. But as a servant, you had very little independence. You belonged to your master or mistress in almost a proprietary way. You worked at the direction of your employers. You had very little control over your own life. The fourth option was engaging in sex work. This option was not respectable. This option was condemned by the church. This option carried significant stigma. But this option was available. And this option, in some ways, offered more agency and more economic opportunity than the other options available to many women. Here's why. A servant woman earned a small wage if she earned anything at all. A servant woman often worked for room and board, with no monetary compensation. A servant woman was vulnerable to sexual assault from her employers or from other men in the household. A servant woman had essentially no legal protection if she was assaulted. A servant woman had no control over her own labor. A prostitute, on the other hand, could earn money directly. A prostitute could earn more money than she would earn as a servant, often significantly more. A prostitute could choose to some degree which clients to serve. A prostitute could accumulate wealth. A prostitute could potentially use her earnings to buy her way into a different life, perhaps by saving enough money to marry or to start a different business. This is not to say that prostitution was a good option. It wasn't. But it was an option that offered more agency and more economic opportunity than some other options available to medieval women, particularly to poor medieval women or women from broken families. Also, medieval authorities recognized that prostitution was going to happen no matter what. Medieval authorities recognized that men would seek sexual services outside of marriage. Rather than trying to eliminate prostitution entirely, which was impossible, medieval authorities created systems to manage it. In some cities, authorities confined prostitution to specific districts. In other cities, authorities created regulations about how prostitution could be practiced. In some cities, authorities required prostitutes to pay taxes. In some cities, authorities required prostitutes to wear distinctive clothing. In some cities, authorities even provided protection for prostitutes against violent clients. The most famous example of this was the Southwark Stews in London. The Stews were a district of London where brothels operated. The buildings were technically owned by the Bishop of Winchester, who derived significant income from renting the buildings to brothel keepers. So you have the church, which condemned prostitution as sinful, actually profiting from prostitution. This contradiction was built into the medieval system. In some cities, the regulation was even more explicit. In some cases, the city government actually owned the brothels and rented them to operators. In some cases, the city government hired prostitutes on a regular basis, almost like they were public servants. In some cases, the city government required all unmarried women of a certain age to either marry or leave the city, but made an exception for women who registered as prostitutes. The church's official position on prostitution was that it was sinful. The church taught that sexual activity outside of marriage was sinful. The church taught that prostitutes were women who had committed serious sin. But the church also recognized that prostitution existed and would continue to exist. Some medieval theologians argued that prostitution was a necessary evil. Some argued that prostitutes served a social function by preventing men from raping respectable women. Some argue that prostitutes should be tolerated because the alternative, a world where men's sexual desires couldn't be satisfied outside of marriage, would lead to even more sin and more social disorder. Some parts of the church actually provided social services for prostitutes. Some convents took in women who wanted to leave prostitution and become nuns. Some bishops provided dowries for women who wanted to marry and leave prostitution. Some cities had religious organizations dedicated to reforming prostitutes and helping them re-enter respectable society. So medieval society had a complex attitude toward prostitution. Prostitution was condemned. Prostitutes were stigmatized. But prostitution was also recognized, regulated, and, to some degree, tolerated. Understanding this historical context is essential for understanding the daily life of a medieval prostitute. The women did this work in a society that condemned the work while also regulating it and profiting from it. The women lived within a legal and social system that acknowledged their existence but denied their respectability. Let's meet the women whose day we're going to follow. These are fictional characters, but they represent real women who actually lived in medieval cities and actually engaged in sex work. There was a woman named Margaret. Margaret was 38 years old. Margaret had not always been a brothel keeper. Margaret had started her adult life as a prostitute, just like many of the women we're about to meet. Margaret had been very poor. Margaret's father had been a laborer. Margaret's mother had died when Margaret was young. Margaret had been taken in by relatives, but she was a burden on them. When Margaret was 18 years old, she was sent to work in a brothel. Margaret had worked as a prostitute for about 10 years. Margaret had been intelligent about her work. Margaret had been careful with her money. Margaret had saved what she could. Margaret had built relationships with regular customers. Margaret had developed a reputation for being reliable and discreet. Margaret had learned how the business worked. When Margaret was about 28 years old, she had managed to save enough money to lease a building and start her own brothel. Margaret had used her knowledge and her connections to hire other women and to attract customers. Margaret had run a fairly successful business. By the time Margaret was 38, she was relatively wealthy for a woman of her status. Margaret still remembered what it was like to be a prostitute. Margaret understood the work and understood the women. Margaret tried to run her brothel in a way that was relatively humane, by the standards of the time. Margaret provided housing for her workers. Margaret provided food. Margaret paid the women a share of what they earned. Margaret tried to protect the women from the most violent and dangerous clients. But Margaret was also a businesswoman. Margaret needed to make a profit. Margaret needed to manage her employees. Margaret sometimes had to make difficult decisions about what was best for her business versus what was best for her workers. Margaret was not a saint, but she was not a monster either. Margaret was a woman doing business in a medieval city. There was a woman named Eleanor. Eleanor was 26 years old. Eleanor had been working as a prostitute for 6 years. Eleanor worked in Margaret's brothel. Eleanor shared a room with 2 other women. Eleanor slept in a bed with 2 other women. But Eleanor was earning decent money. Eleanor had grown up in a village. Eleanor's father had been a peasant farmer. Eleanor's mother had also been from the village. Eleanor had had a normal childhood for a peasant girl. Eleanor had learned basic domestic skills. Eleanor had learned to work. Eleanor had expected to grow up and marry someone from the village and have a traditional peasant life. But when Eleanor was 20 years old, her father had been accused of a crime. Eleanor's father had been accused of poaching on a noble's land. Eleanor's father had been arrested. Eleanor's father had been tried and convicted. Eleanor's father had been executed. Eleanor's father was dead. Eleanor's mother had been devastated. Eleanor's mother had died the year after Eleanor's father's death. Eleanor suspected that her mother had simply given up on life, but Eleanor couldn't be sure. Eleanor was now orphaned. Eleanor's extended family had been sympathetic, but they were also poor. They couldn't support Eleanor. Eleanor was old enough to work, but she had no skills that were valuable in the labor market. Eleanor had worked as a servant for a year, but the work was terrible and the pay was terrible. The master's son had tried to rape Eleanor. Eleanor had managed to fight him off and had left the position. A woman who Eleanor had met while working as a servant had told Eleanor about the brothel. Eleanor had been desperate. Eleanor had needed to survive. Eleanor had gone to the brothel. Eleanor had entered the work. The first few months had been terrible. Eleanor had been traumatized. Eleanor had been angry. Eleanor had been desperate. Eleanor had wanted to escape. But Eleanor had also realized that the work paid better than serving. Eleanor had realized that she had some degree of control in her work. Eleanor had realized that the other women understood her situation. Eleanor had begun to adapt. After 6 years, Eleanor was skilled at the work. Eleanor was able to manage the emotional and physical aspects of the work. Eleanor had regular customers who liked her and who asked for her specifically. Eleanor was earning good money. Eleanor was saving money. Eleanor had a plan. Eleanor wanted to save enough money to leave the work. Eleanor wanted to marry someone of her own choosing. Eleanor wanted to have children. Eleanor wanted a different life. Eleanor believed that her plan was possible. There was a woman named Catherine. Catherine was 41 years old. Catherine had been working as a prostitute for more than 20 years. Catherine could barely remember a time when she wasn't doing this work. Catherine's early life had been difficult. Catherine had been born into a poor family in a city. Catherine's mother had been a prostitute. Catherine had known from a young age what her mother did, even though nobody talked about it directly. When Catherine was 7 years old, her mother had died of a disease that Catherine didn't understand. Catherine had been taken in by other women who worked in the brothel. These women had raised Catherine. These women had educated Catherine about the only world she knew. When Catherine had reached adolescence, it had been assumed that she would do the same work as her mother and the women who had raised her. Catherine had been too young to understand her choices. Catherine had had no real alternative. Catherine had begun working as a prostitute when she was very young, probably around 13 or 14. Catherine had worked continuously since then. Catherine's earning capacity had declined significantly as she had aged. Catherine was no longer young or attractive in the way that young women are attractive. Catherine had wrinkles and gray hair and a worn body. Catherine couldn't command the prices that younger women could command. Catherine had fewer clients than she had had when she was younger. Catherine earned less money. Catherine was in a precarious position. Catherine was still living in Margaret's brothel. Margaret was somewhat kind to Catherine because Catherine had been with her for a long time. But Margaret was also a businesswoman. If Catherine stopped generating enough income, Margaret might ask her to leave. Catherine knew this. Catherine was aware that her time might be running out. Catherine was working as hard as she could to maintain her income. There was a woman named Anne. Anne was 19 years old and had been working as a prostitute for only a few months. Anne was a different kind of woman than Eleanor or Catherine, and had grown up in a moderately wealthy merchant family. Anne's father had been a successful businessman. Anne's family had lived comfortably and had been educated, which was unusual for a woman, and could read, and could write, and could do mathematics, and had been trained in the skills that a merchant's wife needed. But then Anne's father had made bad business decisions. Anne's father had invested in ships that sank. Anne's father had invested in goods that never arrived. Anne's father had lost money. Anne's father had continued to make bad decisions. Within a few years, Anne's family had fallen from prosperity to poverty. Anne's father had lost his business. Anne's family had lost their house. Anne's family had become destitute. Anne's father had been unable to arrange a respectable marriage for Anne. A merchant's daughter from a prosperous family would have had a substantial dowry and would have been able to marry another merchant or minor noble. But a merchant's daughter from a family that had fallen into poverty had nothing to offer. No respectable man would marry Anne. No respectable family would have Anne for a daughter-in-law. Anne's family had become desperate. Anne's mother had made a suggestion that shocked everyone. Anne's mother had suggested that Anne work in a brothel temporarily. Anne's family needed money. Anne's earning power was being wasted. Anne could earn money in the brothel. Anne's family could use that money to try to recover from their financial difficulties. Eventually, once the family had recovered and could leave the work and try to marry respectably, Anne had been horrified and had been ashamed and had thought that her life was over. But Anne had also understood that her family was desperate and had understood that there were no other options and had agreed to the work. And had been working in the brothel for only a few months, and was struggling emotionally, and was dealing with the trauma of the work. But Anne was also aware that her intelligence and her education make her interesting to clients. Some clients seek out and specifically for conversation as much as for sex. Some clients are scholars or merchants or educated men who appreciate Anne's mind as well as her body, and is earning good money, and is calculating how long she'll need to work to earn enough to help her family recover. There was a woman named Judith. Judith was 28 years old. Judith had been working as a prostitute for about 8 years. Judith's situation was particularly complicated because Judith had 2 children. Judith had become pregnant when she was very young, probably around 16 or 17. The father had not been willing to marry her. The father had not been willing to support her. Judith's family had been ashamed. Judith's family had mostly abandoned her. Judith had had to figure out how to survive with a baby. Judith had worked as a servant for a while, but having a baby made that very difficult. Employers didn't want to hire women with children. Judith needed to find work that would allow her to have a baby with her or to have her baby cared for nearby. Judith had turned to sex work. Judith had then become pregnant again by a different man for similar reasons. Judith now had 2 children. Judith had a daughter who was 7 years old and a son who was 5 years old. Judith's circumstances were very difficult. Being a mother and being a sex worker created challenges that didn't exist for women without children. Judith's earning capacity was reduced because she couldn't work as much as other women could work. Judith had to leave work to pick up her children. Judith had to pay someone to care for her children while she worked. Judith was dealing with the stress of being separated from her children. But Judith had no other way to survive. Judith's family wouldn't help her. No employer would hire her as a servant because she had children. She was trapped. The only way she could support her children was through sex work. Judith was working toward a goal. Judith wanted to save enough money so that she could stop doing sex work. Judith wanted to be able to support her children without having to work as a prostitute. But Judith wasn't sure if she would ever earn enough. Judith wasn't sure if her goal was realistic. There was a woman named Beatrice. Beatrice was 31 years old. Beatrice had been working as a prostitute for about 12 years. Beatrice's story was unique because of a physical characteristic. Beatrice had been born with a physical deformity. Beatrice's left hand was significantly smaller than her right hand. Beatrice's left hand had limited function. Beatrice's fingers on her left hand didn't work properly. This deformity had affected Beatrice's entire life. In the medieval world, physical deformity was often seen as a sign of divine disfavor or as a result of moral transgression. People with deformities were often excluded from normal society. Beatrice had been treated as different her entire life. Beatrice had been avoided. Beatrice had been pitied. Beatrice had been sometimes seen as dangerous or evil. When Beatrice needed to find work, many employers wouldn't hire her because of her deformity. They thought she wouldn't be able to do the work properly. They thought clients might be disturbed by her appearance. They thought she was somehow unfit. But when Beatrice came to the brothel, she found a place that would accept her. Some clients were attracted to the deformity itself. Some clients found it interesting or exotic. Beatrice had learned to use a deformity to her advantage. Beatrice had become successful at the work. Beatrice had regular customers. Beatrice was earning good money. Beatrice was grateful for this opportunity. Beatrice knew that without the brothel, she would have no way to survive. Beatrice knew that the brothel accepted her when almost everywhere else rejected her. Beatrice was protective of a place in the brothel. There was a woman named Rose. Rose was 62 years old. Rose had been working in prostitution for more than 40 years. Rose had been in the work since she was a young woman, probably around 20 years old. Rose's history was long and complicated. Rose had worked in various brothels in various cities. Rose had sometimes worked for brothel keepers like Margaret. Rose had sometimes worked independently, finding her own clients. Rose had lived a difficult life. By the time Rose was in her 60s, her earning capacity had virtually disappeared. Rose was old. Rose was no longer attractive in the way that young women are attractive. Clients didn't come to see Rose. Rose couldn't earn money from sex work anymore. Rose was now employed by Margaret to do other work in the brothel. Rose helped with cleaning. Rose helped with cooking. Rose helped with managing the other women. Rose was doing the work that needed to be done to keep the brothel functioning. Margaret employed Rose out of a combination of kindness and obligation for her many years of work. But Rose's position was precarious. Rose was no longer generating income directly. Rose was a cost rather than a profit center. Rose knew that her time in the brothel might be limited. Rose knew that eventually Margaret might ask her to leave. And Rose had no idea what she would do. The day in a medieval brothel begins early. It doesn't begin at dawn exactly, but it begins in the early morning hours when most of the city is still asleep or just beginning to wake up. The brothel is a building. In the case of Margaret's operation, it's a fairly substantial building. It's located in the district of the city that is known for brothels. Everyone in the city knows what this district is. The authorities know. The church knows. Respectable people know. The district is marked. The district is identified. You can walk into this district and know that you're in a place where sex work happens. Margaret's building is 3 stories tall. The ground floor has a common area where clients are received and where some of the work happens. The ground floor also has a kitchen where food is prepared. The upper floors have individual rooms where the women live and where much of the sex work happens. At the back of the building, there's a courtyard. The courtyard is used for various purposes. Laundry is hung there to dry. Cooking is sometimes done there. The toilet facilities are accessed from the courtyard. The horses or pack animals that sometimes belong to clients are tethered there. Eleanor wakes up in the early morning. Eleanor shares a room with 2 other women. The room is small. The room is cold. The room has a single window that opens onto the street. Eleanor, Catherine, and Beatrice all sleep in one bed together. The bed is a wooden frame with a straw mattress. There are blankets, but the blankets are thin and don't provide much warmth. Eleanor opens her eyes. She's been asleep, or at least she's been resting. It's still dark outside, but there's a kind of gray light that indicates that dawn is coming soon. Eleanor is cold. Eleanor's body is curled against Catherine for warmth. Eleanor carefully extracts herself from the bed without waking the other 2 women. Eleanor walks to a small basin of water that sits in the corner of the room. The water is cold. Eleanor splashes it on her face. The cold water shocks her awake. Eleanor washes. She washes her hands. She washes between her legs. She tries to be clean, even though water is precious and there isn't much of it. Eleanor puts on a simple dress. Medieval clothing is complex, with multiple layers, but Eleanor's working clothes are relatively simple. There's a long linen undergarment called a chemise or shift. This garment goes next to her skin and extends down to her ankles. Over this, Eleanor puts on a dress called a kirtle or gown. The dress is made of wool or linen. The dress has sleeves. The dress has a loose fit. Eleanor ties the dress with a cord or belt around her waist. Eleanor doesn't wear a head covering yet. She'll put that on later. Eleanor leaves her hair loose for now. Eleanor looks at herself in a small piece of polished metal that serves as a mirror. The mirror is not very clear. The reflection is distorted. But Eleanor can see enough to know that she looks acceptable. Eleanor is not young anymore. Eleanor is 26, which is relatively old for a woman. But Eleanor still takes care of her appearance, and is awake in her room, and shares a room with 1 other woman, which is a luxury. Eleanor had paid extra for better accommodations because her family can still provide her with some money, and washes carefully, and has been trained since childhood to care for her appearance carefully, and has certain standards, and washes her hands, and washes her face, and washes between her legs, and is more thorough in her washing than Eleanor is, and puts on a dress that's nicer than the dresses worn by the other women in the brothel. The dress is made of better material. The dress is made of linen rather than wool. The dress is dyed a color other than the natural brown or gray that most medieval clothing was. Anne's dress is dyed a reddish color. And arranges her hair carefully. Anne's hair is long and dark. And arranges her hair so that it frames her face nicely. And puts on a head covering. But the head covering is made of fine linen and is arranged carefully. And looks in the polished metal mirror, and is satisfied with her appearance, and is using her appearance strategically because she knows that men are attracted to certain things, and she wants to be as attractive as possible to the kinds of men who will spend money on her. Catherine is awake. Catherine has actually been awake for a while, but she's staying in bed as long as possible because the bed is warm, and getting out of bed means confronting the day. Catherine is 41 years old. Catherine's body feels much older. Catherine has aches and pains. Catherine has arthritis in her hands and her knees. Catherine has old scars from previous injuries. Catherine has illnesses that come and go. But Catherine gets up. Catherine knows that she needs to get up. Catherine knows that there's work to be done. Catherine walks to the basin of water. Catherine washes, but not as thoroughly as Eleanor. Catherine washes her hands and her face. Catherine washes between her legs because that's important for hygiene related to her work. But Catherine's washing is functional rather than careful. Catherine puts on a dress that's old and worn. The dress has been repaired many times. The dress has stains that won't come out. The dress is faded. But the dress is what Catherine wears. Catherine ties her hair back with a piece of cloth. Catherine washes her hands from a lack of water, and because she doesn't really care about her appearance anymore in the way that Eleanor does. Catherine has learned that clients come or they don't. Catherine has learned that she can't control very much. She prepares herself adequately. She's clean. She's dressed. She's ready. That has to be enough. Judith is awake at her separate room. Judith doesn't live in the brothel. Judith lives in a small room in a different part of the city, in a neighborhood that's closer to where her children are being cared for. Judith wakes up early. Judith washes and dresses. Judith eats a small breakfast. Judith then walks through the dark streets to get to the brothel. It's a walk of maybe 30 minutes. Judith passes other people who are awake early. Some of them are workers heading to jobs. Some of them are people delivering goods. Some of them recognize Judith. Some of them know that Judith is a prostitute. Some of them nod to Judith. Some of them ignore her. Some of them make comments under their breath. Judith tries not to pay attention to what people say. When Judith arrives at the brothel, she greets Margaret. Margaret gives Judith a nod. Margaret doesn't talk much. Margaret is already awake and is managing the business. Judith goes to the area where she will work. Judith washes with the water that's available. Judith changes into the dress that she wears for her work. She puts the dress on over her walking clothes. Judith prepares herself. She takes a few deep breaths. She mentally prepares herself for the day of work ahead. Beatrice is awake. Beatrice shares a room with Eleanor and Catherine. Beatrice has a disability that affects her mobility somewhat. Beatrice's left hand doesn't work well, so her daily activities take a bit longer than they would for women who have two fully functional hands. But Beatrice manages. Beatrice gets out of bed. Beatrice washes. Beatrice puts on a dress. Beatrice arranges her hair. Beatrice is aware of her appearance, but not in an anxious way. Beatrice has accepted herself. Beatrice has learned to be comfortable with her body and with her appearance. Rose is awake in her very small room. Rose has a private space, which is one of the benefits of having worked for Margaret for so long. But the space is tiny. There's barely room for a cot and a small table. Rose gets up. Rose's body is stiff and painful. Rose is old. Everything is harder for Rose than it is for the younger women. But Rose persists. Rose washes. Rose dresses. Rose is prepared for her day of work that consists of cleaning and cooking and maintaining the brothel. Margaret is awake in her private room. Margaret's room is the most comfortable room in the entire building. Margaret has a real bed, not just a shared sleeping platform. Margaret has a small private area. Margaret has her own possessions. Margaret gets up. Margaret washes carefully. Margaret dresses in clothes that are nicer than what the other women wear. Margaret is a brothel keeper. Margaret has status. Margaret uses her appearance and her clothing to indicate her status. After Margaret dresses, she begins her rounds. She checks on the kitchen. She makes sure that there's food prepared. Margaret is managing the business. Margaret is thinking about what needs to happen today. Margaret is planning for the clients that she expects. Margaret is thinking about which women should work and when. Margaret is thinking about the money and the profit. Eleanor and the other women who live in the brothel gather in the common area. They eat breakfast. Breakfast is simple. There's bread. There's ale. There might be some cheese. The meal is quick. The women eat. They don't talk much. They are preparing themselves mentally for the day's work. They are thinking about what the day might bring. They are thinking about which customers might come. They are thinking about how much money they might make. They are thinking about risks and dangers. They are thinking about how to get through the day. After breakfast, the women prepare the spaces where they will work. They clean the rooms. They change the bedding. They arrange things to be neat and presentable. They put out candles or oil lamps. They prepare everything for the clients who will come during the day. Eleanor checks her appearance one more time. Eleanor looks in the polished metal mirror. Eleanor wants to be as attractive as possible. Eleanor has learned that being attractive means more clients. More clients means more money. Eleanor fixes her hair. Eleanor adjusts her dress. Eleanor puts on a kind of jewelry, simple pieces that she's made herself or that clients have given her over the years. By late morning, the women are ready. The brothel is prepared. Everything is in place. They are waiting for clients to arrive. They are in their rooms or in the common area. They are waiting. Some are thinking about their plans for the future. Some are thinking about the work ahead. Some are just trying to get through the day. The first clients of the day will start arriving soon. The day is about to begin in earnest. The first client of the day arrives in the late morning. The brothel is not crowded at this time of day. The clients at this time of day are not working people. Working people would be working at this time. The clients in the late morning are people who have flexible schedules or who can take breaks from their regular work. The first client is a merchant. He is perhaps 4 to 5 years old. He is moderately wealthy. He has several successful business ventures. He comes to the brothel regularly. He knows Margaret. He knows some of the women. He comes in the late morning because the brothel is not crowded at that time. He prefers to not have to wait. Margaret greets him warmly. They exchange pleasantries. The man and Margaret know each other. They have a business relationship. They conduct their transaction smoothly. The man indicates which woman he would like. He says Eleanor's name. Margaret nods. Margaret confirms that Eleanor is available. The man pays Margaret directly. Margaret takes her cut, about 40% of what the man paid. The man receives the change. He goes to Eleanor's room, where Eleanor is waiting for him. Eleanor greets the man warmly. She's practiced this greeting many times. She smiles. She invites him to sit. She offers him something to drink. Some brothels have ale or wine available. Margaret brothel is relatively generous with the drinks. Eleanor pours him a cup of ale. Eleanor sits next to him. They talk for a few minutes. The man tells Eleanor about his day. Eleanor listens. She makes appropriate comments. She acts interested in what he's saying. She's learned how to do this. She's learned that some men want sex and nothing else. But some men want conversation and companionship along with sex. This man seems to be the second type. He wants to feel like Eleanor cares about him. Eleanor provides this feeling. After a few minutes of conversation, Eleanor stands. She indicates to the man that it's time. The man understands. He follows her to the bed. Eleanor helps him undress. She undresses herself. Eleanor has removed the outer parts of her clothing, but she's kept on her shift, her undertunic. She lies down on the bed. The man gets on top of her. The sex is quick. It's not satisfying for Eleanor. Sex rarely is. But Eleanor makes sounds that suggest that she's enjoying it. She's learned to do this. The man finishes. He gets off her. Eleanor gets up. She goes to the basin and washes. She cleans herself carefully. The man gets dressed. Eleanor gets dressed again. She puts her outer layers back on. She asks if he wants anything else. He doesn't. He gives her a coin as a tip. Eleanor takes it and thanks him. He leaves. The whole interaction has taken maybe 30 minutes. Eleanor has earned money. She has provided a service. She has a client. It's one of the many clients she'll have today. Another client arrives. This client is different. This client is a craftsman. He's a mason or a carpenter or something similar. He has a bit of money, but not a lot. He's working class. He's not wealthy. He has earned enough money that he can afford to pay for sex occasionally, but it's not something he does often. He comes into the brothel. He's shy. He's not sure what to do. He's nervous. Margaret recognizes that he's uncomfortable. Margaret understands the situation. Margaret has seen this type of client many times. Margaret recommends Catherine. Catherine is old. Catherine is not the most desirable woman in the brothel. Younger men would prefer Eleanor or Anne. But Catherine is kind. Catherine is patient. Catherine doesn't judge. Catherine would be appropriate for a nervous, inexperienced client. The man would be embarrassed with a younger, more attractive woman. Catherine is what he needs. Catherine greets the man. She's warm. She's not condescending. She doesn't make him feel foolish for his nervousness. She makes him feel comfortable. She offers him a drink. She sits with him. She talks to him. She asks him about his work. She listens to what he says. The man feels like someone cares about him. This is something he doesn't experience in his normal life. Catherine is providing this. After conversation, Catherine takes the man to her bed. Catherine helps him undress. Catherine undresses herself. Catherine lies on the bed. The man gets on top of her. The man is nervous. The man finishes quickly, which is what often happens with men who are nervous or inexperienced. Catherine doesn't judge. Catherine acts like it was fine. Catherine acts like it was satisfying. Catherine washes. The man gets dressed. Catherine gets dressed. The man pays Catherine. He gives her a tip. He leaves. Catherine has earned money. She has provided a service, and more importantly, she's provided comfort and acceptance. Eleanor has another client. This client is different. This client is crude. This client treats Eleanor in a way that's disrespectful. The client makes rude comments about Eleanor's body. The client demands things that are uncomfortable for Eleanor. Eleanor has learned not to take this personally. She has learned that some men are like this. She provides a service they are paying for. She makes sounds that suggest she's enjoying it. The man finishes. He leaves without giving a tip, and has had a client. The client is educated. The client is intelligent. The client is not looking for sex primarily. The client is looking for conversation. The client is a scholar. The client has read books. The client appreciates N's intelligence. They talk about books. They talk about history. They talk about philosophy. They have a genuine intellectual conversation. Eventually, they have sex, but the sex is almost secondary to the conversation. The morning progresses. Clients come. The women work. They provide services. They take payment. They clean themselves. They wait for the next client. The work is repetitive. The work is physical. The work is psychological. The work requires a certain kind of dissociation. The women have learned to separate themselves from what they are doing. They have learned to not feel too much. They have learned to focus on the money and the survival. Margaret oversees everything. Margaret makes sure that the clients are satisfied. Margaret makes sure that the money is collected. Margaret takes her cut. Margaret ensures that the women are safe from truly dangerous clients. Margaret has had to remove clients who were too violent or too demanding. Margaret has had to deal with situations where a woman was hurt. Margaret tries to create a relatively safe environment for the women, though safety is always limited. By the early afternoon, many clients have come. The morning has been moderately busy. The women have been working. They take a break for lunch. They eat. They rest for a while. The early afternoon brings a different rhythm. Margaret checks on her women. She makes sure that nobody is injured or upset. She makes sure that everyone is able to continue working. Margaret is aware of her responsibility to keep the brothel operating and to keep her workers functional. Eleanor is tired, but Eleanor is not exhausted yet. Eleanor is thinking about how many more clients she might have today. Eleanor is calculating her potential earnings. Eleanor is thinking about her savings. Eleanor is thinking about her future plans. Catherine has rested. Catherine's body is still in pain, but Catherine has managed to rest and to push through the discomfort. Catherine is thinking about which clients she might have in the afternoon, and is thinking about her family, and is thinking about how much money she's earned so far today, and is calculating how much longer she might need to work before she can help her family recover. Judith is working at a faster pace. Judith is aware of the time. Judith knows that she needs to leave the brothel in the late afternoon to pick up her children. Judith is trying to see as many clients as possible in the time that she has available. Judith is maximizing her income for the time that she's working. Rose is preparing lunch. Rose is cleaning. Rose is doing the work that keeps the brothel functioning. The afternoon brings more clients. The afternoon is often busier than the morning. In the afternoon, more people are free to visit the brothel. Some people take a break from their work. Some people go to the brothel before they go home to their families. Some people go to the brothel instead of going home to their families. The afternoon is often one of the busier times of day. The women prepare themselves again after lunch. They wash. They change their clothes if necessary. They check their appearances. They prepare themselves for more clients. The afternoon will bring different kinds of clients and different kinds of interactions. A group of apprentices arrives. They are young men, probably in their late teens or early 20s. They are working as apprentices for craftsmen. They are not wealthy, but they have enough money to come to the brothel together. They want to have sex. They also want to have fun. They want to laugh and joke with each other and with the women. Margaret assigns women to the different men. The women separate the men into different rooms. The women work with the men. The men are enthusiastic but not very experienced. The interactions are relatively quick, but the men are friendly and not violent. They are good clients in many ways. A wealthy merchant arrives. The merchant is traveling through the city on business. The merchant has money and wants to spend it. The merchant chooses N. The merchant is educated and can afford to spend time with N. They talk for a while. The merchant is interested in his intelligence and her education. The merchant is impressed by the fact that and can read and write. They have sex, but the sex is secondary to the companionship and the conversation. The merchant is satisfied. The merchant pays in a large amount of money. The merchant gives in a generous tip. The merchant leaves. A man who appears to be a minor noble arrives. The man has status. The man has money. The man walks around the brothel looking at the women. The man points to Eleanor. Eleanor goes with the man. In Eleanor's room, the man is demanding. The man wants things that are degrading. Eleanor has learned to provide what clients want, within her own limits. Eleanor agrees to most of what the man wants. But when the man wants something that Eleanor is not comfortable with, Eleanor says no. The man becomes angry. The man insists. Eleanor continues to refuse. The man raises his hand. Eleanor is afraid. Eleanor thinks the man is going to hit her. But before the man can strike Eleanor, Margaret appears in the room. Margaret has heard Eleanor's refusal and has been listening. Margaret tells the man that he needs to stop and that he needs to leave. The man is surprised. The man is angry. The man is accustomed to getting what he wants. The man tries to argue with Margaret. Margaret is strong. Margaret is experienced. Margaret has done this before. Margaret stands between Eleanor and the man. Margaret tells the man again that he needs to leave. The man is afraid of Margaret. The man has realized that Margaret is not someone he can intimidate. The man gets dressed. The man leaves without paying. Margaret tells Eleanor that she doesn't owe him anything. Eleanor is shaken, but Eleanor is grateful for Margaret's intervention. After the incident, Eleanor is shaken. Eleanor has experienced violence in her work before. Eleanor knows that it's a risk of the work, but it's still frightening when it happens. Eleanor takes a moment to recover. Eleanor washes carefully. Eleanor has another client coming. Eleanor tries to put the previous incident aside. Eleanor continues working. A man arrives who is a regular customer. The man comes to see Catherine regularly. The man is kind to Catherine. The man doesn't want anything degrading or violent. The man is respectful. The man seems to genuinely like Catherine. Catherine is happy to see him. Catherine and the man spend time together. Catherine provides sex, but they also talk. The man asks Catherine about her life. Catherine is surprised that he cares. Catherine answers his questions. The man listens. After they are done, the man pays Catherine. He gives her a generous tip. He tells her that he enjoys seeing her. Catherine is grateful. A young man arrives. The young man is nervous. The young man is probably visiting a prostitute for the first time. Margaret notices his nervousness and recommends Catherine. Catherine is experienced with nervous clients. Catherine is kind. Catherine puts the young man at ease. Catherine provides sex for him. Catherine makes the experience as comfortable and as positive as she can. The young man leaves satisfied and grateful. A man arrives who is clearly drunk. The man is stumbling. The man can barely stand. Margaret is cautious. Margaret is aware that drunk clients can be problematic. They can be violent. They can be unpredictable. Margaret has to assess whether this man is a threat. The man wants to see Eleanor. Eleanor is willing. Eleanor has worked with drunk clients before. Eleanor takes the man to her room. Eleanor helps him undress. The man is having difficulty. The man's performance is affected by his drunkenness. The interaction is strange and uncomfortable, but the man is not violent. The man is just drunk and kind of pathetic. Eleanor provides the service as best she can. The afternoon wears on. More clients come. The women keep working. The brothel is busier now than it was in the morning. The women are getting tired. They've been working for hours. They've had multiple clients. They provided multiple services. They're experiencing physical and emotional fatigue. Eleanor is thinking about leaving the work. Eleanor has been doing this for 6 years. Eleanor is exhausted. Eleanor is thinking about whether it's worth it. Eleanor is thinking about the money that she's saving. Eleanor is thinking about the future. But Eleanor also knows that she needs to keep working. Eleanor is not yet at her goal. Catherine is moving more slowly now. Catherine's body is aching. Catherine is physically worn out. Catherine is aware of her age. Catherine is aware of the fact that her earning capacity is declining. Catherine is trying to keep working despite her physical exhaustion, and is maintaining her composure, and is providing good service, and is being strategic about her interactions. and is thinking about how much money she's made today, and is calculating whether she's making progress toward her goal. Judith is working quickly. Judith is aware of the time. Judith knows that she needs to leave in the next hour or two to pick up her children. Judith is trying to maximize the number of clients she sees in the remaining time. Beatrice is having a relatively good day. Beatrice has had several clients. Beatrice has earned decent money. Beatrice is not exhausted yet. By late afternoon, it's becoming clear that Judith needs to leave soon. Judith has had many clients today. Judith has earned good money. Judith is satisfied with her earnings for the day. Judith begins to prepare to leave. Judith washes one more time. Judith changes out of her work dress and into her walking clothes. Judith says goodbye to Margaret. Margaret nods. Margaret has noted that Judith has worked hard today. Judith leaves the brothel. Judith walks through the streets toward the area where her children are being cared for. It's getting toward evening. The light is changing. The day is getting later. Judith is thinking about her children. Judith is thinking about how they are. Judith is thinking about whether they are hungry. Judith is thinking about the work that she's done today. To truly understand the daily life of a medieval prostitute, you need to understand the economics. Money is central to the work. Money is why women do this work. Money is what they are trying to earn. Money is the primary motivation for most of the women. Let's follow the money. When a client comes to the brothel and pays for a sexual service, where does that money go? How is it distributed? What does it mean for the women? When a client comes to Margaret's brothel and pays for a service, the money first goes to Margaret. Margaret collects the payment from the client. Margaret takes her cut from the payment. In Margaret's brothel, Margaret takes about 40% of what the client pays. So let's say a client pays 12 pence for service. Margaret takes about 5 pence. The woman who provided the service receives about 7 pence. But this is before any other costs are taken out. The woman has to pay for her housing. If the woman lives in the brothel, Margaret charges her rent. The rent might be about 2 pence per day. The woman has to pay for her food. Margaret provides food, but the food is not free. The woman might pay about 1 penny per day for food. So the woman is paying about 3 pence per day in housing and food costs. So if a woman earns 7 pence from a single client, and she has to pay 2 pence for housing and 1 penny for food, she's left with 4 pence from that single client. If a woman has 5 clients in a day, she earns 35 pence from the clients. She pays 15 pence for housing and food. She's left with 20 pence. 20 pence per day is actually quite a good income for a medieval woman. A serving woman might earn only a few pence per day. A woman spinning thread might earn even less. But there are other costs. Some women need to buy new clothes occasionally. Some women need to buy other necessities. Some women send money to family members. Some women save money toward other goals. The work is not consistent. Some days there are many clients. Some days there are few clients. On slow days, the woman still has to pay for housing and food, so her net earnings are very small. Some days there are almost no clients. On those days, the woman loses money. Eleanor has been saving money for years. Eleanor has earned a decent income. Eleanor has been relatively careful with her money. Eleanor hasn't spent everything she's earned on immediate needs. Eleanor has saved a portion. Eleanor has money hidden in her room. Eleanor has given some money to another woman for safekeeping, because Eleanor doesn't trust that all her money will be safe if she keeps it all in one place. Eleanor's savings are significant. Eleanor has probably saved 200 pence or more over the years. This is a substantial amount of money. With this money, Eleanor might be able to buy her freedom from the brothel. Eleanor might be able to use this money to make a different life. Eleanor might be able to use this money to marry someone. Eleanor has plans for her money. Eleanor wants to leave the work. Eleanor wants to marry. Eleanor knows a man who she might be able to marry. The man is a craftsman. The man is not wealthy, but the man is respectable. Eleanor thinks that if she offers to bring money into the marriage, the man might be willing to marry her, despite her past. Eleanor is hoping that this will work. Eleanor is working toward this goal, and is also saving money. Anne's purpose is different, and wants to save enough money so that her family can recover from their financial difficulties, and wants to use her money to restore her family's status, and wants to eventually leave the brothel and return to a respectable life, and has been working for only a few months, but and is earning good money, and is intelligent and educated, and clients appreciate this. and is making more money than many women in the brothel, and is calculating how much longer she needs to work to earn enough to help her family recover. Catherine is not saving money. Catherine has had little money to save. Catherine has earned money, but most of it has gone to Margaret for housing and food and other costs. Catherine doesn't have a substantial savings. Catherine is not thinking about the future in the way that Eleanor or Anne is. Catherine is thinking about survival. Catherine is trying to make enough money to get through each day. Catherine's situation is precarious. Catherine's earning capacity is declining because she's aging. Catherine's earning capacity might continue to decline. Catherine doesn't have savings to fall back on. If Catherine can't earn enough money to cover her housing and food costs, Catherine will be in trouble. Judith is saving money carefully. Judith has a specific purpose for her money. Judith wants to eventually leave the brothel. Judith wants to be able to support her children without doing sex work. Judith wants to have a different life where she's a full-time mother and not a sex worker. Judith is saving as much as she can. But Judith is also supporting her children. Her children need food and clothing. Her children need housing. So Judith's ability to save is limited. Judith has probably saved around 50 or 75 pence. This is not as much as Eleanor has saved, but it's something. Beatrice is saving money. Beatrice is relatively content with her situation. Beatrice is not desperate to leave the work like Eleanor and Judith are. Beatrice is saving because she's prudent and because she wants to have some financial security. Beatrice is probably saving at a moderate rate. Rose is not saving money. Rose is not earning much money. Rose is not generating income directly from the sex work anymore because she's too old. Rose is being paid small amounts by Margaret for the work that she does in maintaining the brothel. Rose's income is small. Rose doesn't have the ability to save. Margaret is making money. Margaret is a businesswoman. Margaret takes a cut from every client. Margaret charges rent to the women who live in her brothel. Margaret sells food to the women. Margaret sometimes sells other goods to the women. Margaret is profitable. Margaret has accumulated wealth. Margaret has more money than she needs for basic survival. Margaret has luxury items. Margaret has nice clothing. Margaret has jewelry. Margaret has money that she's hidden. Margaret is perhaps the wealthiest person in her household. Margaret is also taking risks with her money. Margaret invests in her business. Margaret maintains a building. Margaret pays the authorities when it's necessary. Margaret sometimes has to pay people to protect her business or to keep them from shutting down her business. Margaret has to pay people to handle problems. There are costs to running a brothel that are not visible. There are risks that Margaret is taking. The economics of medieval prostitution are complex. The women are owning money, yes, but the money is being taken by others. Margaret is taking her cut. The landlord is taking rent. The food costs are significant. The women are not earning as much as they might imagine when they first think about the work. But compared to other kinds of work available to medieval women, prostitution is still relatively lucrative. A woman who works as a servant might earn only a few pence per day. A woman who spins thread might earn even less. A woman who does prostitution can often earn more. This is why women do it. This is why women enter the work and stay in the work, despite the danger and the stigma. The money keeps women in the work. The hope of accumulating money keeps women in the work. The possibility of using money to escape the work or to change their circumstances keeps women in the work. Prostitution in the medieval world is dangerous. The women who do this work face multiple kinds of danger. Some dangers are physical. Some dangers are emotional. Some dangers are social. Some dangers are existential. All of these dangers are constant and present. The physical dangers are significant and real. Violent clients are one major danger. Some clients are aggressive. Some clients want things that are harmful. Some clients force women to do things they don't want to do. Some clients beat women. Some clients injure women severely. Some clients kill women. Violence is a constant risk in the work. The women know this. The women have talked about this. The women have strategies for managing this. The women try to identify potentially violent clients before they are alone with them. The women try to stay alert. The women try to have ways to call for help if something goes wrong. Margaret has had to deal with violent clients many times. Margaret has had to remove clients from the brothel. Margaret has had to help women who have been hurt. Margaret has had to clean up injuries. Margaret has had to comfort women who have been traumatized by violence. Margaret has had to make difficult decisions about whether to report violence to authorities or to handle it privately. Margaret knows that reporting violence to authorities can sometimes result in the authorities blaming the woman or even punishing the woman for being a prostitute. The law does not always protect prostitutes. Sometimes the law treats a prostitute as a criminal rather than as a victim. So Margaret has learned to handle things privately when she can. Margaret has learned to protect her business by dealing with problems internally. Margaret has learned to warn other women about dangerous clients. Margaret has learned to turn away clients who she knows are dangerous. Disease is another significant danger. Sexual disease is common in medieval brothels. The women call it by various names. They call it the pox, the sickness, the curse. The disease is painful. The disease can affect a woman's ability to work. Some cases of the disease are temporary. Some cases are permanent. Some cases progress and become more serious. Catherine has had sexual disease before. Catherine got the disease several years ago when she was in her mid-30s. The disease was very painful. Catherine's body was covered with sores. Catherine experienced severe pain. Catherine wasn't able to work for several weeks. Catherine lost income. Catherine almost lost her place in the brothel because she wasn't generating income. Eventually, Catherine recovered, but Catherine was never quite the same. Catherine still sometimes has pain related to the old disease. Catherine knows that she could get the disease again. Eleanor is terrified of getting disease. Eleanor has seen what disease does. Eleanor has seen women who have gotten sick. Eleanor has seen women who are unable to work because of disease. Eleanor has seen women who have been forced to leave the brothel because of disease. Eleanor's fear of disease is very real. Eleanor tries to be careful. Eleanor washes frequently. Eleanor uses water and soap. Eleanor tries to be sanitary, even though sanitation is not well understood in the medieval world. But Eleanor knows that disease can happen anyway. Eleanor knows that she could get sick at any time, and her earning capacity could be destroyed. Pregnancy is another danger. Some women get pregnant. If a woman is pregnant, she can't work for months. If a woman has a baby, she has to decide what to do with the baby. Some women leave the brothel to have the baby and then come back. Some women stay in the brothel and have the baby there. Some women abandon the baby. Some women die in childbirth. There are ways to prevent pregnancy that medieval people knew about. There are herbs that can reduce the chance of pregnancy. There are things that can be done to try to prevent conception. But these methods are not completely effective. Women still get pregnant. Judith has children. Judith got pregnant while she was doing sex work. Judith didn't want to get pregnant. Judith tried to prevent it, but she got pregnant anyway. Judith had to stop working for a while. Judith lost income. Judith had to figure out how to care for a baby while still trying to do sex work. This has been a challenge throughout Judith's experience of sex work, and is terrified of getting pregnant, and knows that if she gets pregnant, her family will be even more ashamed of her, and knows that her situation is already precarious, and is taking precautions to avoid pregnancy, and is also aware that pregnancy can happen, and is anxious about this possibility. The emotional and psychological dangers are also significant. Doing sex work takes an emotional toll on the women. The women have to dissociate from what they are doing. The women have to separate their sense of self from their work. The women have to not feel too much about what's being done to their bodies. This dissociation is necessary for survival, but it also comes with psychological costs. Eleanor sometimes feels numb. Eleanor sometimes can't feel anything. Eleanor worries that she's losing the ability to feel normal emotions. Eleanor sometimes has dreams about the men she's been with. Eleanor sometimes has nightmares. Eleanor sometimes feels intense shame and disgust about what she does. Eleanor tries to manage these feelings, but they are always present. Eleanor is concerned about what she's becoming. Catherine has been doing this work for so long that she doesn't feel much of anything anymore. Catherine has learned to separate herself completely from what she's doing. Catherine watches herself from outside her body. Catherine is dissociated. Catherine doesn't feel the violation because Catherine doesn't really feel anything. This is a kind of protection, but it's also a tragedy. Catherine has lost the ability to feel and is relatively new to the work, so she still feels things quite intensely, and sometimes breaks down crying, and sometimes has panic attacks, and sometimes feels so ashamed that she can barely leave the brothel. and is dealing with the psychological trauma of the work while also trying to maintain her appearance and her functionality, and is suffering. Beatrice is in a different situation. Beatrice has come to the work because she has no other option. Beatrice is grateful to have a work. Beatrice doesn't experience the same level of shame that the other women experience, because Beatrice has never had any alternative. Beatrice has never had the expectation of a different kind of life. So Beatrice is less traumatized by the work than women like Eleanor who have had different expectations. Judith is dealing with guilt about her children. Judith knows that her work is affecting her ability to be a good mother. Judith knows that her children are being cared for by someone else while she's working. Judith feels like she's failing her children. Judith wants to stop doing this work and be a full-time mother. But Judith doesn't have enough money to stop. Judith is trapped. The social dangers are also significant. Prostitutes are stigmatized. Prostitutes are not respectable. Prostitutes are looked down upon by society. Prostitutes are condemned by the church. The stigma affects women in various ways. Eleanor is thinking about marrying a respectable man. But Eleanor knows that if the man finds out that she's been doing sex work, the man might refuse to marry her. Eleanor knows that her past is going to be a barrier to the kind of life she wants. Eleanor is hoping that she can keep her past secret. Eleanor is hoping that she can become respectable again. But Eleanor is not sure that this is possible. Eleanor is afraid that she'll be marked as a prostitute for the rest of her life, and is hoping to return to respectable society, and is hoping that her time in the brothel will be temporary and that she'll be able to marry someone respectable. But knows that respectable men might not want to marry a woman who's been a prostitute, and knows that she might carry the stigma for the rest of her life, even if she leaves the brothel. Catherine knows that she'll never be respectable again. Catherine has accepted this. Catherine is too old and has been doing this work for too long. Catherine doesn't have the expectation of returning to respectable society. Catherine has come to terms with the fact that she's going to be a prostitute for the rest of her life. There's also the matter of the authorities. In some cities, authorities are somewhat protective of prostitutes. In other cities, authorities are hostile. In some cases, authorities regulate the work but also protect the women. In other cases, authorities use the work as a way to exploit the women. Margaret has relationships with local authorities. Margaret pays officials to protect her business. Margaret pays officials to look the other way when necessary. Margaret has learned how to navigate the political system. But Margaret is also aware that the protection can disappear if the authorities change or if the political situation changes. The existential danger is perhaps the most significant. The women are aware that they are living lives that are precarious. The women are aware that they are vulnerable. The women are aware that their future is uncertain. The women are aware that they are trapped in circumstances that they didn't choose and that they might not be able to escape. Rose is living with this existential danger constantly. Rose is old. Rose can no longer do the primary work. Rose is dependent on Margaret's kindness. Rose knows that this kindness might not last forever. Rose knows that she might be asked to leave. Rose knows that she has no other place to go. Rose is facing the possibility of destitution and homelessness. As the afternoon progresses into evening, the nature of the work changes. The clients in the evening are different from the clients in the daytime. The evening brings a different kind of clientele. The daytime clients are often people with legitimate reasons to be away from work. They are people with some discretion and some resources. The evening clients are often working people who finish their day's work. The evening clients are often people who've been drinking. The evening brings more volume and more variety. The evening brings more chaos and more unpredictability. The women prepare for the evening. They rest for a brief time after the afternoon clients. They eat an evening meal. They wash. They prepare themselves for the evening clients. The work will continue through the evening. The work might last until late at night, or it might continue even into the early morning hours. Eleanor is tired. Eleanor has had many clients during the day. Eleanor has been working for hours. Eleanor is exhausted both physically and emotionally. But Eleanor is also thinking about money. Eleanor knows that the evening often brings more clients. Eleanor knows that she can make more money in the evening. Eleanor prepares herself. Eleanor puts on her work clothes. Eleanor prepares herself mentally for the evening clients. Eleanor knows that the evening clients are often different from the daytime clients. The evening clients are sometimes rougher. The evening clients are sometimes more demanding. The evening clients are sometimes more dangerous. Catherine is also tired. Catherine's body aches. Catherine is physically worn out. But Catherine has learned to push through the tiredness. Catherine has learned to keep working despite exhaustion. Catherine prepares herself. Catherine is ready for the evening clients and is thinking about how much money she's made today and is doing calculations in her head and is estimating how much longer she needs to work to earn enough money for her purposes and is thinking about the timeline and is thinking about how soon she can leave the brothel and go back to a respectable life. Beatrice is preparing for the evening. Beatrice is thinking about specific clients that she has. Beatrice has some clients who come regularly in the evening. Beatrice is looking forward to seeing these clients. These clients are relatively kind. These clients treat Beatrice well. Judith has left the brothel. Judith has not worked in the evening. Judith is with her children. Judith is spending the evening with her children. Judith is helping her children prepare for sleep. Judith is reading stories to them. Judith is putting her children to bed. Judith is lying in her small room with her children, listening to them breathe as they sleep. Rose is preparing the brothel for the evening. Rose is cleaning. Rose is making sure that the spaces are ready for the evening clients. Rose is working steadily, despite her age and her tiredness. Rose knows that her value is in the work that she does to keep the brothel running. Rose is trying to make sure that she continues to be valuable enough to keep her place. The evening clients start arriving. The brothel becomes busier. The common area fills with clients. The women are working. The women are taking clients. The women are providing services. The women are taking payment. There's a group of young men who come together. They are craftsmen. They are apprentices. They are working-class men who've been working hard all day. They've come to the brothel for sex and for the social atmosphere. There are multiple women working at the same time, and the men are being served. The brothel is busy. The atmosphere is lively. Eleanor is working with one of the men. Eleanor is trying to be efficient. Eleanor is aware that there are other clients waiting. Eleanor is trying to give each client enough of her attention, while also being mindful of the time. Eleanor works quickly. Eleanor provides a service. Eleanor takes payment. Eleanor moves on to the next client. Catherine is working with another man. The man is relatively kind. The man is not aggressive. The man is respectful. Catherine is grateful. Catherine provides a service. Catherine takes payment and is working with a different kind of client. The client is a minor noble. The client has more money than the working-class clients. The client can afford to take more of Anne's time and is strategic and provides good service and tries to make the client happy. The client is satisfied. The client pays more. The evening continues. More clients come. The women keep working. The brothel is full of activity. The sounds are conversation and laughter, and the sounds of people coming and going. There's a moment when Eleanor gets a break between clients. Eleanor is exhausted. Eleanor sits down. Eleanor closes her eyes for a moment. Eleanor is thinking about how much longer she can do this. Eleanor is thinking about whether it's worth it. Eleanor is thinking about the money that she's saving. Eleanor is thinking about the future. Eleanor is thinking about the man she hopes to marry. Eleanor is thinking about the life she wants to have. But then another client arrives. Eleanor gets up. Eleanor prepares herself. Eleanor goes back to work. The evening wears on. The clients keep coming. The women keep working. The night is getting late. The work continues. The brothel is still busy. By late evening, some clients are drunk. Some clients are aggressive. The risk of violence increases. Margaret is paying close attention. Margaret is more present. Margaret is ready to intervene if necessary. There's a client who's drunk. The client is being rude to Eleanor. The client is demanding things that Eleanor is not comfortable with. Eleanor is trying to handle it, but the client is becoming more aggressive. Eleanor says something to the client that he doesn't like. The client raises his hand, but before the client can strike Eleanor, Margaret appears. Margaret has heard Eleanor's refusal and has been listening carefully. Margaret tells the client that he needs to leave. The client argues. Margaret is firm. Margaret tells the client again that he needs to leave. The client is beginning to be frightened by Margaret's intensity. The client gets dressed. The client leaves. After the incident, Eleanor is shaken again. Eleanor is dealing with the aftermath of near violence. Eleanor takes a moment to recover. Eleanor washes. Eleanor has another client. Eleanor continues working. Eleanor is trying not to think about what just happened. A man arrives who is a regular customer. The man comes to see Catherine regularly. The man is kind to Catherine. The man doesn't want anything degrading or violent. The man is respectful. The man seems to genuinely like Catherine. Catherine is happy to see him. Catherine and the man spend time together. Catherine provides sex, but they also talk. The man asks Catherine about her life. Catherine is surprised that he cares. Catherine answers his questions. The man listens. After they are done, the man pays Catherine. He gives her a generous tip. He tells her that he enjoys seeing her. Catherine is grateful. The night is very late. The clients are becoming fewer. Some of the women are finishing their work. Some women are going to rest. But the brothel is still operating. The work continues late into the night. By the time the night is very late, the brothel is quieter. Most of the clients have gone. Most of the women have finished working. The women are exhausted. The women are cleaning themselves. The women are preparing to rest. Eleanor is done working for the night. Eleanor has had many clients. Eleanor has earned good money. Eleanor is exhausted physically and emotionally. Eleanor washes thoroughly. Eleanor changes into her sleeping clothes. Eleanor goes to her room. Eleanor lies down on the bed next to Catherine and Beatrice. Eleanor is thinking about the day. Eleanor is thinking about all the men she's been with. Eleanor is thinking about the money she's earned. Eleanor is thinking about how much more money she needs to save before she can leave this work. Eleanor is thinking about the man she might marry. Eleanor is thinking about the life she wants to have. Eleanor is hoping that her plan will work. Eleanor is hoping that she can escape this work and have a normal life. Catherine is also done working. Catherine has had several clients. Catherine has earned money, though not as much as Eleanor. Catherine is tired. Catherine is moving slowly. Catherine has aches and pain from the work. Catherine washes. Catherine changes into her sleeping clothes. Catherine gets into bed. Catherine is thinking about her body. Catherine is thinking about how worn out her body is. Catherine is thinking about how much longer her body can do this work. Catherine is thinking about what will happen when she can no longer work. Catherine is thinking about death. Catherine is thinking about what will happen to her. Catherine is accepting of her fate, but Catherine is also afraid, and is done working for the night, and has had several clients, and has earned good money, and is young and relatively attractive, and clients have wanted her, and has made more money than she might have made doing other kinds of work, and is thinking about her family, and is thinking about how much money she's made, and is calculating whether she has earned enough yet, and is sitting in her room, and is alone, and is allowing herself to cry, and doesn't cry in front of the other women because she doesn't want them to know how much she's struggling, but alone, and allows herself to feel the emotions that she's been pushing down all day, and cries about the work, and cries about her circumstances, and cries about the shame, and cries about what her family thinks of her, and cries about what she's become, and cries about the violation that she experiences, and cries about the fear and the danger, but after a while, and stops crying, and washes her face, and prepares for sleep, and lies down, and is thinking about the future, and is thinking about escape, and is thinking about leaving this work and returning to respectable society, and is hoping that her family will forgive her for what she's done. Beatrice is done working for the night. Beatrice has had fewer clients than some of the other women, but Beatrice has had clients. Beatrice is tired. Beatrice is grateful. Beatrice is grateful that she has work. Beatrice is grateful that the brothel accepts her despite her deformity. Beatrice is grateful that she's able to earn money. Beatrice washes. Beatrice changes clothes. Beatrice gets into bed. Beatrice is thinking about her clients. Beatrice is thinking about the fact that some clients are attracted to a deformity. Beatrice is thinking about how she's turned a deformity into something that can be profitable. Beatrice is not happy. Exactly. But Beatrice is not deeply unhappy either. Beatrice has accepted her circumstances. Beatrice is at peace with her situation, in a way. Judith is lying in her room. Judith has not worked in the evening. Judith is with her children. Judith's children are asleep next to her. Judith is thinking about her children. Judith is thinking about how long she can keep doing this work. Judith is thinking about what kind of life her children are going to have. Judith is thinking about whether her children will grow up knowing what their mother does. Judith is also thinking about the clients she had during the day. Judith is trying not to think about them, but the thoughts are there anyway. Judith is thinking about the way she had to separate herself from what was happening. Judith is thinking about the work that she does to survive. Judith is thinking about the money she earned and how much progress she's making toward her goal. Rose is in her small room. Rose has been working all day. Rose has been doing the work that keeps the brothel running. Rose is exhausted. Rose is old. Rose is thinking about the future. Rose is thinking about what's going to happen to her. Rose is thinking about the fact that she's becoming less and less valuable to Margaret. Rose is thinking about the possibility of being forced to leave the brothel. Rose is afraid. Margaret is in her private room. Margaret has been managing the brothel all day. Margaret has dealt with clients and workers and authorities and 1,000 different things that running a brothel requires. Margaret is tired. Margaret is satisfied with a day's work. Margaret has earned a good profit. Margaret is thinking about the business. Margaret is thinking about how well the brothel is doing. Margaret is thinking about whether the business is sustainable. Margaret is thinking about plans to expand or improve the business. Margaret is thinking about the future. Margaret is thinking about whether she should save money for old age or whether she should invest in other enterprises. Margaret is thinking about power and security and wealth. Margaret is thinking about what's next for her. The brothel is mostly quiet now. There are few sounds. There's the sound of women sleeping. There's the sound of the buildings settling. There's the sound of the city outside, dog barking in the distance, occasional voices, the sounds of the night in a medieval city. There's the sound of wind. There's the sound of rain if it's raining. All of these women, Eleanor, Catherine, and Judith, Beatrice, Rose, and Margaret, have been through a day of work. All of these women have different circumstances. All of these women have different histories. All of these women have different futures. But all of them are connected by the work they do. All of them are involved in the medieval sex trade. All of them are part of the historical reality that we often don't talk about. All of them are human beings trying to survive in a world that offers limited options to women. As the night deepens, as the city becomes quieter, as sleep comes, the women rest. Tomorrow, the work will begin again. Tomorrow, there will be more clients. Tomorrow, there will be more money owned. Tomorrow, there will be more of the same work and the same challenges and the same dangers. But tonight, the women rest. The women sleep. The women dream. Some of them dream about the work they do. Some of them dream about escape. Some of them dream about the future. Some of them dream about things that have nothing to do with the brothel. Some of them sleep dreamlessly, a deep sleep of exhaustion. The medieval brothel is a place of work and survival. The medieval brothel is a place where women do what they have to do to survive. The medieval brothel is a place where human beings deal with difficult circumstances. The medieval brothel is a place where economics and danger and survival all intersect. Pause. What have we learned about the daily life of a medieval prostitute? We've learned that it was a life of work and complexity. We've learned that it involved daily routines and regular clients and the rhythms of commerce. We've learned that it involved danger and difficulty and emotional challenges. We've learned that it involved economic calculation and survival. We've learned that medieval prostitutes were human beings. They were women dealing with circumstances. They were women trying to survive. They were women with hopes and plans and dreams for the future. Some of them wanted to escape the work. Some of them wanted to accumulate wealth. Some of them wanted to have respectable lives. Some of them had accepted their circumstances and were focused on survival. We've learned that medieval prostitution was not hidden and shameful in the way that later eras treated prostitution. Medieval prostitution was acknowledged and regulated. Medieval prostitution was recognized as a part of the social system. This doesn't mean that prostitutes were respected. They weren't, but they were acknowledged. The work was recognized. The women were known. We've learned that medieval attitudes towards sexuality were different from modern attitudes. Medieval people acknowledged that sex was a normal part of life. Medieval authorities created systems to manage sex work rather than trying to eliminate it entirely. Medieval society had a kind of pragmatism about sexual desire. We've learned that medieval women had very few options for survival. We've learned that some women chose prostitution because it offered more agency and more economic opportunity than other options available to them. This doesn't mean that prostitution was a good choice. It means that the alternatives were worse. We've learned that medieval prostitution was an economic system. Money was central to the system. Women owned money. Brothel keepers made profits. Authorities collected taxes. The system was economically sophisticated, even though it involved activities that we now think of as exploitation. We've learned that there were real dangers in medieval prostitution. There was a danger of violence. There was a danger of disease. There was a danger of pregnancy. There was a danger of poverty and destitution if you became unable to work. These dangers were serious and constant. We've learned that there were also emotional and psychological costs to the work. The women had to dissociate from what they were doing. The women had to manage shame and fear and guilt. The women had to navigate the stigma of being a prostitute while also surviving economically. We've learned that the women were not all the same. They had different histories. They had different circumstances. They had different hopes and plans for the future. Some were forced into the work by circumstance. Some entered the work as a deliberate choice. Some saw it as temporary. Some expected to do it for the rest of their lives. We've learned that medieval prostitution is an important historical topic that can help us understand the medieval world. We've learned that studying medieval prostitution can help us understand medieval society, medieval attitudes, medieval women, and medieval history. Understanding medieval prostitution helps us understand that the medieval world was not a monolithic place with one way of doing things. The medieval world was complex. The medieval world had diversity. The medieval world had people dealing with difficult circumstances. The medieval world had women trying to survive. Understanding medieval prostitution helps us understand medieval attitudes towards sexuality. The medieval church condemned sexual activity outside of marriage. But medieval society also recognized that this activity would happen. Medieval authorities created systems to regulate and manage prostitution. This shows that medieval society was more pragmatic about sexuality than we sometimes assume. Understanding medieval prostitution helps us understand medieval attitudes toward women. Medieval women were not all the same. There were respectable women and non-respectable women. Prostitutes were the ultimate non-respectable women. But prostitutes were also recognized members of society. Prostitutes had a defined social role. This shows that medieval society had categories and hierarchies for women, and that these categories had both privileges and limitations. Understanding medieval prostitution helps us understand the lives of medieval women more broadly. The daily life of a medieval prostitute was not so different from the daily life of other medieval women in some ways. Medieval women, regardless of their status, were dealing with limited options. Medieval women, regardless of their status, were dealing with economic dependence. Medieval women, regardless of their status, were dealing with vulnerability. The main difference was that prostitutes acknowledged the economic reality more directly. A servant woman was economically dependent on her master, but she might not fully acknowledge this. A prostitute was directly exchanging her labor for money. A prostitute was operating in a market. A prostitute was acknowledging that her body and her labor had economic value. This directness, this acknowledgement of economic reality, is actually one of the things that allows us to understand the medieval economy. By studying medieval prostitution, we can understand how medieval people thought about labor, about value, about money, about commerce. We can also understand something about medieval sexuality. Medieval people experienced sexuality. Medieval people had sexual desires. Medieval people had sexual relationships. Medieval people engaged in sexual activity. These are things that we sometimes forget when we think about the medieval period as being purely religious or purely focused on the afterlife. But medieval people were human beings with human desires. Medieval prostitution is evidence that medieval people acknowledged these desires. Medieval prostitution is evidence that medieval people created systems to manage these desires. Medieval prostitution is evidence that medieval society was more complex and more nuanced than we sometimes assume. Understanding medieval prostitution also helps us understand something about the continuity of human experience. The sex trade exists in the modern world. The sex trade has existed in all historical periods. The sex trade will probably continue to exist. Understanding medieval prostitution helps us understand that the sex trade is not a modern invention. The sex trade is not something that emerged with modern capitalism or modern exploitation. The sex trade is an ancient practice that has taken different forms in different times and places. But the fundamental reality remains. There are people, mostly women, who engage in sex work. There are people who buy sexual services. There are people who profit from facilitating these transactions. These realities existed in the medieval period just as they exist now. The specific forms that the sex trade takes are different. The specific dangers and the specific benefits are different. The specific legal and social frameworks are different. But the fundamental practice is the same. Pause. What have we learned tonight from exploring the daily life of a medieval prostitute? We've learned about a hidden history. We've learned about women whose stories are often not told. We've learned about a complex and nuanced reality that doesn't fit into simple narratives or easy judgments. We've learned that history is not just about kings and queens and famous people. History is also about ordinary people dealing with ordinary challenges and extraordinary circumstances. History is about the people who are often forgotten or marginalized. History is about the women whose voices are not always heard. We've learned that medieval society was not so different from modern society in some ways. Medieval women, like modern women, were dealing with limited options. Medieval women, like modern women, were trying to survive. Medieval women, like modern women, were trying to find agency and control in a world that limited their choices. We've learned that the medieval world was a world where survival was a primary concern for many people. We've learned that money was important. We've learned that economics was central to how people lived their lives. We've learned that medieval people were people like us. They had hopes and fears. They had plans for the future. They had dreams. They had desires. They had struggles. They were human beings trying to make sense of their lives. As you lie here in comfort and safety, as you prepare to drift toward sleep, let yourself sink deeper into rest. Let the images and the stories and the details of medieval prostitution fade into the background. Let your mind become quieter. Let your body become heavier. Let yourself move deeper toward sleep. The medieval brothel is a place of the past. The medieval city is a place of the past. The medieval world is a place of the past. You are safe in the present. You are in a place of comfort and safety. You are supported. You are protected. The women of the medieval brothel are gone. The story that we've explored tonight is history. The past cannot hurt you. The present can give you rest. Sleep now. Let your body sink deeper into rest. Let your mind become quieter. Let the weight of the day lift away. Let yourself drift toward complete sleep. Think about the arc of history. Think about how the world has changed. Think about how women's opportunities have expanded since the medieval period. Think about how the options available to women now are so much greater than the options available to medieval women. Think about how grateful you can be for the time and place in which you live. You have options that would have been unimaginable to medieval women. You have freedom that would have been unimaginable to medieval women. You have rights that would have been unimaginable to medieval women. You have access to safety and security and opportunity that would have been unimaginable to medieval women. Sleep. The night is safe. The darkness is peaceful. Your bed is comfortable. Your room is warm. You are at rest. You are protected. Sleep deeply. Sleep peacefully. Sleep without fear or danger. Sleep in a way that the medieval women would discuss tonight could never sleep. Sleep in safety and comfort and peace. And as you sleep, dream of a time long past. Dream of medieval cities and medieval lives. Dream of women trying to survive. Dream of the complexity and the struggle and the humanity of those who came before us. Dream of the past, knowing that you are safe in the present. But know that you are safe here in the present. Know that the struggles of the medieval world are in the past. Know that you have access to safety and comfort and opportunity that would have been unimaginable to the people of the medieval period. Sleep now. Let yourself drift away. Let the story fade. Let the images dissolve. Let the sounds become distant. Let yourself float toward sleep. The medieval prostitute's day is over. The night has come. The work is done. Rest is available. Sleep is coming. Sleep. Sleep deeply. Sleep safely. Sleep peacefully. The story of medieval prostitution is complete. The women are at rest. The brothel is quiet. The city is sleeping. You, too, can rest now. You, too, can sleep. You, too, can find peace in the safety and comfort of the present moment. The medieval world is in the past. Your present is safe. Your future is open. You have time and space and peace. You have rest. Sleep now. Let yourself drift. Let yourself sink. Let yourself surrender to sleep. Let your body become heavy. Let your mind become quiet. Let the world fade. Let sleep come. The work of the medieval prostitute is done. Your work for today is done. Rest is available. Sleep is coming. Please like and subscribe to our channel for more videos. Sleep.